What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today, this is a topic just absolutely enjoy doing, and it's throwing hollow body frogs. It is one of my other favorite techniques. As soon as you can get them fish to come up and eat, a top water, it is just incredible. If I could throw a frog year round and catch them, I would. That'd be the only thing I tied on. But today I just want to run through a couple of tips I've got and kind of how I approach when they start eating a frog and maybe the different style of frogs and a little bit on color and that kind of stuff. So to jump into it, once we get into when those fish are moving up and it gets warm enough and that water temp's getting up in, your 58 and it's hitting 60 and maybe it's creeping on up, in the low 60s. It's time to be throwing a topwater. And a frog is one of the first things I'd go to because usually you're around a lot of cover. Those fish will get up there in the grass, they'll get around docks, around bushes, and a frog is just a bait that you can throw up there into anything and always get that bait to come back out and catch those fish. So I have some unique uh, ideas on frogs. You know, Nothing against people that There's a lot of great frog fishermen out there, but I have my own personal techniques and reasons behind why I throw certain frogs over another frog. But I'll kind of get into that. And the first one that I usually go to when those fish are up there trying to spawn is a poppin frog. And for you guys that don't know, this is a hollow body frog, and a poppin frog has just got a cupped mouth on them. A regular frog is just, got a pointed nose on them. And the reason behind the poppin frog to me is bluegill. And bluegill, brim, and all of that is one of the main species that those bass are going to eat around the spawn. And a poppin frog just does an incredible job of mimicking a bluegill. And the other reason is it is really versatile in that you can work this bait like a popper. You can just chug this bait and just leave that bubble trail behind it, or you can walk this bait just like you can the regular style frog. But I seem to get more bites in the earlier part of the year on a popping frog. That's my reasoning behind it. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I have confidence in, and that's why I always go first to a popping frog. Now, the one that I've always thrown for years is the Spro popping frog. You guys can see I've got a ton of them in here. Um, and the Spro, they make an incredible frog, and I always had success with them. And all as you if you haven't noticed, the colors in my popping frog are all a brim color. I mean, like every one of them are a brim color uh, popping frog. I've got some whites. I usually do keep a few popping uh, frogs in a white color, just when those fish get around, a lot of bait fish and stuff like that. But majority of the time, it's going to be that brim color. Once I get into those fish are getting into some really, really heavy cover, that's when I'm going to go to your traditional style frog with a pointed nose. This frog just allows you to go through that heavier cover, unlike the popping frog is going to get hung up when you're in some real, real thick cover. If you're around a fishery that's got, just real sparse grass, maybe it's got a few bushes and some docks and stuff like that, not anything real, real heavy, I would say go with a popping frog because to me, you can walk this bait just like you can that traditional frog, or like I said earlier, you can chug this bait like a popper, and it's just really, really versatile to use that popping frog. But once those fish get done spawning and you have that wave of fish that stays shallow, they're going to get into some really, really thick cover. If any of you guys have been to any of the like Tennessee River lakes, or some of the other places that have just grass mats for miles, you'll see that just it looks like a green field on top of the water. I mean, it's just stupid thick. That's when 100% I'm gonna go with that traditional frog, just because if you throw a popping frog in it, you're gonna get hung up the whole entire time, and it's no good. But colors for my popping frog gotta be brim color or a some sort of shad pattern. That's the only two I throw in my popping frog. Haven't really branched out any from that. I throw different variations of brim color. You know, I've got some that's got a real natural belly to them, or some that's a whitish chartreuse belly, and that to me, I switch back and forth based on watercolor. If I'm a little bit more cleaner water, I'm going to go to that natural belly. If I've got stained, murky water, I'm going to throw something with a more solid white or chartreuse or even orange belly on them. With the traditional frogs, I've got a ton of colors. You guys can see I got white. I've got some off ghosty white colors, blacks, and a bunch of brims. Um, that also, a lot of it depends on the watercolor. If you've got a lot of mud stained, I'm going to throw my solid colors, your blacks and whites. If you've got a little bit cleaner water, I'm going to go to like a natural, uh, brim color, something like that right there. It's got a real natural belly on them. And the regular frogs, I used to throw the Spro. That's the one of the Spro normal pointed nose frogs there. But the frog that I have fallen in love with is the Snag proof. And I've thrown like these are some of the old Snag proof frogs. They still work tremendously, but they've revamped their whole frog line, and now they've got two different frogs, and I absolutely love the new Snag proof frogs. They're I think one of them's a Phat frog, and one of them is the Bobby's Perfect. Both of them are incredible. The what makes this like the best frog in my opinion is how soft the body is. I mean, it takes nothing to collapse that bait, and the hooks on it are just dynamite. They're in the perfect location behind that bait to not get hung up, but they're at the right angle to where you don't have to worry about getting your frog and bending the hooks up or bending them out or any of that stuff. I don't worry about any of that. These come straight out of the pack ready to go. The only thing I do, like on this one, is I trim the legs up a little bit just because I don't like a real long legs on them, especially in clear water. A lot of times those fish will come up there and just grab the tails. So I usually trim mine up pretty short. But like I said, Snag Proof has revamped their frogs, and I've got, a ton of them now. These are some of the other. I think this one's actually the Bobby's Perfect, and this is that Phat frog. Both of them, I haven't honestly figured out the difference in each one of them. I feel like the Phat frog does work a little bit better when you get into that just really, really thick, cheese mats. And the Bobbies is more of like an all around do everything frog. But they are just an incredible, incredible frog. Walks really, really well. It's got a weight in the, you know, in the back section of them. So you don't have to, like back in the day, I know I used to put BBs in them to weigh those frogs down to get them to sit lower in the mats. And I'll probably do a video on that style of frog fishing this coming summer when it gets time to do all of that. But since they brought these frogs to the market, they've also come out with a popping frog. And I've yet to get my hands on them. Not sure when they're going to release them, but Snapproof has got a popping frog, so I'm really excited to get that one and see if it's going to replace my Spro frogs. Nothing wrong with the Spros; they do fantastic, but the Snapproof is just a lot softer body, and I feel like I'd get a lot better penetration with those Snapproof frogs. Now let's talk about the rod I throw my frogs on. This is where some people don't agree with what I have to say, and that's fine. If you've got your personal preference, it's you do you, whatever works best for you. But when I'm throwing, like I said earlier in the year, and I'm throwing this popping frog around, a lot of sparse stuff. I'm not having to throw it into some real deep, heavy cover. I throw mine on like a between a 7'1" and a 7'3" medium heavy. And a lot of people think that's crazy, like you're supposed to throw a frog on a broomstick of a rod all the time. And for me, that's just not the case. And I seem to think that I get real trigger happy. But that's one thing is when I see that fish come up and eat, I just want to hit them as soon as I can. And that medium heavy gives me a little bit more time to let that fish eat it instead of having a broomstick of a rod. And the other thing is making, short cast and roll cast. I'm able to place that frog exactly where I want it with a medium heavy. With a, heavy or extra heavy rod, you don't have a lot of tip. It's just like I said, it's a pull cue of a rod, and your accuracy is not as great as it would be with a medium heavy like fast action rod. So I throw mine medium heavy, 50-pound braid. I throw 50-pound braid on all of them all the time. The only time that I go to a heavy action rod or an extra heavy is if I'm going to take a normal frog and I'm throwing it in that, the real thick cheese mats, there's just vast, just crazy thick mats, and I've just got to winch those fish out. That's the only time for me I've seen where I've needed to go to a heavy or extra heavy. Um, One of my fishing partners actually, I put him onto that on throwing a medium heavy around just your sparse stuff and around docks and stuff like that, and he saw that he actually was putting more fish in the boat because he was like me. He got real trigger happy and was trying to hit those fish way too quick, and you don't need that. If you've got, especially with these snag proof frogs, it doesn't take much to collapse that bait. A lot of people think you've got to have just a flipping stick of a rod, and you don't. Especially if you've got straight braid, and I have no problem uh, getting those hooks in those fish's mouth. So those are the rods that I use. Even when I do throw that heavy rod, it's usually a 7'3" heavy or extra heavy. But like I said, 80% of the time I'm going to be throwing a 7'2" or 7'3" medium heavy and 50-pound braid. The other thing is my gear ratio on the reel. A lot of people like to throw just a crazy high gear ratio reel, like a 8 something or a 9 something to 1 reel. And I can see where they're coming from, and where you want to be able to, if you're in those mats, a lot of times you may make a bomb cast and then one blows up on a brim way over here, and you need to reel that frog out real quick and throw over there to that fish. And I hear you, and it makes sense. But when you get those fish, when you lean into them, you need a lot of torque to get those fish out. I'm not worried about getting them out faster than the next guy. I want enough power to generate to get that fish up out of whatever cover I caught him in, and bring him to the boat. So a lot of times I throw a 7 to 1 gear ratio, and I have no problem. It's plenty quick enough, but it's also got that just torque to get those fish out. So try that out. If you guys are having problems, sticking fish and you can't get them up out of a mat or out of a bush or whatever it is, try downsizing your gear ratio. It really helps with that low end torque getting those fish out. And if you're missing fish on sparse cover, try a medium heavy. I'm telling you, it might sound crazy, but try it. It it it's helped me, and that's all I throw now is a medium heavy, unless I go to Gunnersville or something like that, and I'm around just crazy matted grass. So like I said, guys, frogging, like anything else, like my swim jig video, keep it simple. You don't have to go buy 20 different colors. I've got shad patterns, and I've got brim patterns, and your blacks. That's about it. And you just base it on, you know, sunny conditions or cloudy conditions or your watercolor. And that's all I worry about. And like I said, I have these two frogs, the Spro and the Snag Proof. I'm hoping to switch, exclusively to Snag Proof once I get those Poppin frogs in. The only other fraud I'll show you guys is this is a situational fraud. There's only one time of the year I throw this, and it's the jackal. I, Kiara. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'll have to go back and look, but it's by jackal, and it's a little. I mean, it's a baby of a frog. I've got a brim color one and a white one. These come in handy usually in the fall time of the year when those fish are eating little bitty bait fish, and you can't get them to come up on a full size frog, or you'll notice they'll start just nipping at the back of it, or they'll come and blow up behind it and all that stuff. I found that this little frog is dynamite when that goes to happening. Even in the shad spawn, I'll have this little white frog tied on just because a lot of the times they'll be blowing up on little bitty bait fish. And the problem I was trying to find a smaller profile frog that I could still get good hookup, with. Because a lot of times once you get into these smaller frogs, the hookup ratio goes down. But I seem to still have pretty good hookup ratios on this jackal. I do on this bait. I do pull these hooks up just a little bit because they come usually pretty angled down just a little bit. So I do bend those up just slightly, barely. But then I have no problem still throwing on 50-pound braid. These frogs have been really, really good when that topwater bite starts to get tough, especially in that fall time of the year. But that's it for me on frogs. Like I said, I keep it simple. I mean, you guys can see my box. I mean, there's a lot of the just duplicate colors, same frogs. Usually every year I'll go buy, same colors. I'll get new ones for tournaments because these you can see the tails on them get all, jumbled up together and get all, dried out and all that stuff. But that's it on frogs, man. I keep it simple, and it seems to work, so I don't change it. Drop a comment what your favorite frog is and any other tips that you have for frog fishing. And remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.